A Nobel laureate economist once said, computers are everywhere except in the productivity statistics. Given the amount of attention on agents, we may be getting to the point where we need to ask a similar question. Today, we have someone who can give us some real insight into that. Madhav Tatai is COO of Agentforce product at Salesforce. Madhav, welcome to the Road to Service as Software.
Thank you so much, George. Very nice to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
So, all right, Salesforce, the reason we're so focused on Salesforce and so interested to talk to you is like Salesforce, the first application vendor that has both a suite of operational applications and a data platform that not just models entities like customer, but the processes like the customer engagement journey. That's that data is what informs agents. So help us understand first, like you guys have all the pieces. Now, when you bring this to customers, how are they thinking about trying to use agents, to apply to their business problems?
Yeah, it's a great question, George. And I think, first of all, it's been an incredible journey of learning over the last 2 years, right? This really started once the consumer GPT apps were out there, and I think people started to see the ability to converse with technology in natural language is going to be really, really powerful. And those first GPT apps, I think, really showed that in terms of answering questions in a very natural way, in terms of interpreting what someone might say without requiring tremendous amounts of specificity. You could just kind of see what the impact would be in the experience layer. And then as we've seen over the last couple of years, that ability to interact in natural language with technology is also incredibly impactful for how we think about software deployment, right? And how we think about what the future of applications are. And so we've been on this journey for a couple of years. We now have over 12,000 customers that have purchased the product. We have thousands and thousands of agents that are live in a bunch of production use cases. And I think the central question really is what you said, which is, as we think about what we do as a company, what Salesforce does is we first contain a tremendous amount of valuable transaction data. We are a metadata platform, right, that connects this transaction data both within the Salesforce ecosystem and then outside the Salesforce ecosystem, so customers can get this very comprehensive view of their customers. And then third, which is a really critical point that you made, is we are also the place where business logic and process gets executed for these really key functions, right? The sales function, the marketing function, the support function, and so on. And so those are really the three things that come together to provide the experiences that we have for the last 25 years. Now, it turns out when you inherit all of that to an AI agent that can also now do this kind of creative, free-flowing conversation, it becomes a very, very powerful tool for customers. And so when we talk to customers about it, it really does come down to, hey, what are the key objectives that you are trying to drive from a KPI perspective? That's always question number one. We've seen thousands of these projects. I've been personally involved in hundreds of different agent implementations here over the last year since we released this product. And it really does come down to, what does the company think the right objective is? And then very quickly, you are now addressing questions about the relevant data, the relevant metadata that has to be harmonized and brought together, and the really critical business process and logic that you want to surface up to the agent in order for it to execute. I think the companies that have done that well are the ones that are starting to see more momentum, more value, more actual execution from their agents.
Okay, so all right, let me see if I can play that back, and then let's elaborate on it. So
Yep.
First was the metrics you want to drive.
Yep.
The second is the data that you need to inform the agents.
Correct.
The third is essentially the business process logic that the agents will need to invoke to operationalize any decisions.
Correct.
Okay, so those are the ingredients that are needed, and the customers that are having the most success are the ones who understand that.
Yes.
But you also have sort of eyes and ears into a much larger customer base that might not yet have wrapped their heads around it from that perspective.
Mhm.
And I want to understand, like some, I know I've talked to like a lot of salespeople and heard through them, so it's one level removed, like that a lot of customers think this is a tools problem. And then,
Mhm.
some other customers think that well, they can do the data model themselves. It's just the data lake. So like help as if you were talking to the customer, talk to me and explain, what sort of wall you're going to run into if you think of it first as a tools problem, and then second, if you think you can do the data modeling yourself.
Yeah. Let's address the first thing. And George, you've seen multiple waves of technology, right? Um, in almost every instance, the technology itself is not an end unto itself, right? And this is like a real red flag for me when I talk to CEOs and CIOs and I hear, hey, um, we have to go put AI into our experiences, or we need to bring agents into our experiences. That to me is the wrong direction to which you want to approach this, right? Take a customer like Indeed, right? Incredibly successful recruiting platform. What I really appreciate about a customer like that is they had a singular goal, which was they believe that the most impact that they can have on the overall recruiting process is if they cut the cycle time of a candidate's journey by 50%. Now, that's a pretty awesome goal, right? I mean, if you can do that, you just imagine the throughput through the system. You imagine the ability for more efficient matching of employers. I mean, you could just imagine what the ramifications of a metric like that are. And everything that they are doing from an agentic perspective is connected to that objective. And so that to me is really the number one thing. The second thing is these agents will exist in heterogeneous architectures. They will connect to machine learning models where you want to bring in predictive analytics. They're going to connect to different data systems. They're going to connect to system level execution with APIs, with agentic actions in very complex ways. So you really have to have an understanding of what is the holistic architecture that we're going to put around these agents in order to make that agent really successful. And this ties back to our discussion about business logic, right? Business logic ultimately is tying together all the steps of these processes, surfacing up the right data at the right time. And so that is really the architecture that you have to really think about as a customer to go implement this technology. Then I think you start to get into the mechanics of the agent. And the mechanics of the agent are, what are the jobs to be done for this agent? How do we think about what that agentic job to be done is going to be executed as? And we've learned a lot about how to do that well. You've seen tremendous, tremendous sophistication in the kinds of prompts we can write, in the way we think about agent logic, in the way we give them instructions. We've made a huge investment in that because a huge insight that we've had is this technology has to bring forward both creativity from the LLMs and control. You have to marry those two things together in order for the agent to perform accurately while still providing that rich experience. So you start to get into the mechanics of the agent at that point, and that's why you're answering really, really detailed questions about, okay, what data do I need to integrate at what point? How do I do that efficiently? How do I do that in a way the agent's still going to preserve both accuracy but also performance? How do I instruct the agent and let it run through its reasoning process in a way that's efficient? And I'm not overloading the LLM with massively complicated prompts that are going to take a long time, that are going to lead to hallucination. So these are the really important execution details that we've really spent a lot of time with customers on.
Okay, let me, I just want to, you gave a really, really rich answer, but I just want to ask what may be a tangential question, which is where in the customer organization are they doing these projects? Because
Yeah.
Salesforce has always been strong in the business, and my understanding is many are sort of at the CEO level, they're just tasking, the CIO or the chief data officer or the
Yep.
CTO with these projects, and a lot of what you're talking about may need that technology, C-level technology, person to put the pieces together.
It's a great point and a really astute observation, George, because I do think the dynamics of organizations are changing in this agentic movement, right? And that is broader than just any one technology. I think how organizations think about agents coming into their workforce will change how organizations are structured. And therefore, it changes, to your point, how people are thinking about these projects right now. So let's talk about the projects. There is no doubt that CIOs and CTOs play an incredibly critical and important role in this phase of this agentic technology. And why is that? Because as with any technology, as it matures, the pieces are all being built, right? So yes, we've got incredible LLM technology. The models evolved to the point in the last couple of years where we think uh, structured reasoning and execution to bring control and consistency is possible, right? Now that sits over and above the model itself, but the models are involved in that reasoning process. So you've got that set of capabilities. You've got the data layer, you've got the system execution layer, you've got the business process logic layer, and these things are all not yet at a point where a technology team is not required, right? Now, the one thing I will say, and this has been true for Salesforce for a long time, Salesforce is a platform. Our customers use Salesforce because we give them a tremendously powerful out of the box experience that has been, that we've learned over 25 years of how sales functions work and service functions work and marketing functions work. And so we give that goodness to anybody that is trying to do this. But make no mistake, a lot of our customers build very sophisticated things on Salesforce. They customize Salesforce, they connect Salesforce with APIs to other systems, they bring data together. So there's always been this marriage of the business function and the IT function working together. For 3 years at Salesforce, I was on our customer success team and owned our own internal implementation of Salesforce. So very, very familiar with this dynamic between what is the business function trying to accomplish and what is the IT organization trying to accomplish. What I see right now is there is a lot of IT and technology-led projects in AI. No doubt about that.
Yeah.
But what's an interesting, I think, dynamic that's starting to happen is the people in the business now have more tools at their fingertips that they can actually directly experiment with this technology. So take our Agentforce platform as an example. In the Agentforce platform, you can go in and you can construct an agent, you can define its topics or its job to be done, you can encode its instructions, you can decide what the agent execution is. Now, that level of agent definition is actually better done by somebody in the line of business. They understand the KPI, they understand the outcome, they understand how that process has to execute, and now they can use some of these tools to build it themselves, versus in the past, you'd have to write out a PRD, you'd have to write out a document, you hand it over to IT, IT looks at it, decides what the requirements are. So that dynamic is interesting, but that business function has to be paired with the technology team, because the technology team is the one that knows, okay, how am I connecting up the data? How am I harmonizing the metadata in the right way? What are the APIs I need to connect? And so I actually think it's bringing these functions a little bit closer together while we democratize access to these tools.
Okay, so this is a key point, because my impression is that there are not a lot of organizations, and maybe your answer is that are marrying the sort of come for the application, stay for the platform, that you really need to bridge the business and the chief data officer, chief technology
Absolutely
officer.
right.
Okay, so that is sort of in a maturity model. That's an organizational maturity model step that's critical. All right. So, so it's almost like that's recommendation number one, is that you can't give the agent project to one side or the other.
I think it has to be CEO led. It has to have alignment across the executive functions, which is both the business functions and the technology functions. And to the thing that we started this conversation with, if it's not wrapped around a really important goal that company has to hit, and it's kind of AI for the sake of AI,
Yes.
I don't think it goes anywhere. I will say one thing, George, is the products are also maturing to where the piece parts of what a technology team would need is really important. So for example, as we've had customers, I gave you the example of Indeed, customers like OpenTable that have been using this product now, right? As they start to use this product, their needs change. it's not just, hey, how do I construct the agent? How do I connect up the data? How do I make sure it's executing on business logic, which is all super important at kind of design phase. Now they want to know, how do I test these agents at scale? How do I have the right observability on the performance? How do I have the right feedback mechanism? So to some extent, we have to build the tools that technology teams have traditionally used in a software development cycle that allow them to do that. I think people have tried to build those things themselves, right, over the last couple of years, which is why you see this kind of proliferation of DIY technology that's out there for technology teams to use. But over time, I think you're going to see that mature to where you can say, okay, this is now a reliable suite end to end that I can use to manage these agents from design through test, through improvement, through feedback, through continuous kind of continuous execution.
So let's unpack that, because there's like there's you know I think a year ago I was told that there were 1,000 customer-facing agent startups valued at 500 million or more, like 1,000,
Yeah.
halfway to unicorn.
Yeah.
Like, so um, let's review that. First, you need to get data from all the sources.
Yep.
First, well, no, I missed. First, you need to start. What's the business outcome you're trying to drive?
What are you trying to do? Yep.
Okay. Then you need to source all the data and model it, not just traditional analytic entity modeling, but process modeling.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have that all the business logic that you're going to invoke, and then all this has to be governed, and then now expand on, because you're describing for me, and I'm sort of struggling to process all this as you're describing it, but you're describing like what I think like Jeff Moore would call a system of agency rather than just an agent.
Yes.
Okay, so like elaborate on that, because that's part of it's not that one function, it's like the whole sort of scaffolding and tools around it.
Yeah. Let me break down the problem in a slightly different way and you see if this resonates for you. In these, the hundreds or thousands of implementations that we've done, right? There are three things that I would call day one problems, and then probably two or three things that are kind of day two problems. Okay. Day one problems are, hey, I need to be able to easily ingest and connect relevant data for this agent. That is the first thing. Now, the mistake people make often is they treat that question as an end-to-end enterprise re-architecture, data re-architecture problem, right? And every time you see that, that is like a, hey, call me in 2 years when you're done with that, because you're probably not going to go build something quickly. So, but that is number one, is can I get the relevant content, if it's a question and answer kind of a service agent, or if it's a policy execution, those kinds of things, can I get the relevant data together, both unstructured data as well as you said, business logic, structured information, all of those things. So that is kind of a day one problem. The other day one problem that's really, really important in agent construction is relying on an LLM to do highly complex process execution with pure natural language instructions is not a viable path to success.
Yeah.
That I think is kind of the key unlock. And in fact, we've talked about our new adaptive reasoning, which effectively you can think of as really bringing the best of these worlds together, right? I want to be able to leverage all the creativity, but I want to bring in deterministic control. And so as we've looked at implementations, we have customers that have attempted to write agent instructions that are 30 steps long. Well, I mean, an LLM is not going to be able to retain context for 30 steps worth of execution in some reliable way, right? It's going to hallucinate. It's going to make some mistakes. So that is a day one problem, which is how do I bring in the right deterministic control over this agent? So that's the second one. The third one is the customer experience itself. This is a bit of an underappreciated part of this, and these consumer applications, I think, have set the bar really high for what these agentic interactions should look like. We've always been kind of lagging on the enterprise side, and I think the time has come to really catch up to that. And so how do you think about that user experience, the customer experience layer? That is another day one problem. So those are the three things. The data, the determinism, and the experience are the three things that I would say are like the first thing that you want to do. The day two problems start to go in the direction of kind of what you were doing, which is, hey, I need to be able to test these agents at scale. I need to be able to trust that these agents are going to do the right thing with my data with the right controls. I need to be able to govern these agents in some way so I understand their performance, I understand exactly what they're doing. So that's that's customers as they get further along the maturity curve, start to really think about what is now this end-to-end set of tools that I need. And then the customers that start to think about this in a sophisticated way will realize I'm not going to be in a homogeneous single agent architecture. I'm going to have these agents interact with each other. How am I going to orchestrate that set of interactions? We've obviously made great progress with MCP. We are, flagship partners with Google on A2A. But customers start to say, okay, I've now thought about agents in certain domains. I've thought about agents for certain processes, but I'm probably going to get to a point where I need to be able to orchestrate all of this process across multiple different technology stacks, multiple different processes, et cetera. So some of the day two things that customers start to think about is the observability tool chain, the orchestration tool chain. How do I think about the system of agents? How are they going to execute? Hopefully that helps in terms of how customers are, depending on their phase of maturity, which problems are they thinking about?
All right, this is awesome. So let's unpack these one by one. These are great, the day two stuff. So let's talk about like testing. So I assume this is related to evals, where it's almost like, these are the tests that have to pass, but these are also part of the feedback cycle for improving the agent over time.
Yes.
So elaborate on that one.
Yeah. So these are stochastic systems. You're going to have kind of a wide variety of responses, and in many cases that's fine, right? If I have a question, that I call into OpenTable, and it's a question about a particular restaurant, there's some room for creativity in what that response is. But if I'm calling a bank, or I'm calling an insurance company, or I'm calling a healthcare company, there's a lot of very specific things and policies that I have to follow in order to provide the right accurate response that is trusted by the customer. So testing is a really, really important part of the scale. We announced this product called Testing Center, which effectively allows you to do batch testing with golden responses plus key analytics on key metrics that you're measuring, and says, okay, how do I now think about at every moment of the interaction, is the agent compliant with that moment, yes or no, as I'm testing the agent? So the testing is a part of our Agentforce Studio, which is a really, really critical thing for customers, particularly that are going to be running these things facing their customers, where the bar is extremely high. That's a really critical capability.
Madhav, let me just jump in for one, and to ask a clarification on that test center, or testing center. Is that something where the business domain expert can work with IT in setting that up?
100%, and it requires that, right? Because the domain expert is the one that knows what the golden response is, or what's the acceptable range of golden responses. They're the ones that know what KPIs do I need to know whether those golden responses, if it's a process, right, versus just a simple Q&A. If it's a process being executed, what KPI am I measuring to know that the agent actually fulfilled that? So the business expert is really, really critical. We've built these tools in a way that they're pretty accessible, where a business person could upload these things themselves and run some tests. Now, everything in the feedback, as you go through deep analysis of the feedback, you will find things that IT will have to help with, right? Hey, this particular API call at this time didn't quite work, or this vector database is not doing the right retrievals, and so there will be things like that will require technologists to kind of jump into. But yes, that marriage is definitely true.
Okay.
So you start with testing. The next thing that you want to be able to do is kind of part of the observability suite, right? And there's multiple levels of observability that are important. Number one, we built a really deep session tracing model where you can look at every single interaction. You can go into whether it's a conversation or a process, and you can say, here's every single step that the agent reasoned through. This was the step that it executed. This was the data that it retrieved. This was the output that it gave. So you can do some really deep analytics on where is this thing working, where is it not working, and why is this important? Sometimes when you say an agent has hallucinated or it's gotten it wrong, you have to litigate where in the chain did it get it wrong. Okay, so for an example, we found that customers, and this was true for Salesforce ourselves, one of our most successful agents that we've built is on our website. If you haven't seen it, you should go check it out. Our support website today is no longer like the traditional support landing page, content link, go here, go there. It's just a single agentic experience. Okay, we flip.
I've tried it. Yes,
just an agentic experience, right? So that website, as we were putting that up, we're like 1.5 million conversations or something like that in at this point. One thing we found though was one of the reasons the agent was inaccurate was our content was actually not written well for agents, right? Agents didn't understand certain acronyms. They didn't understand why certain things connected certain ways. So content could be a problem. That's one problem. A second problem could be, oh, my vectorization, right? My chunking of all of this unstructured data is actually inaccurate. At Dreamforce, we talked about, our new kind of context indexing that Data Cloud can now do, which is allow you to tune the way you chunk this data based on the job that has to be done. So that could be an issue, right? The third thing could be, well, the agent itself, in the way it's executing its instructions, is not doing the right thing. So all of this to say, the observability and the ability to trace step by step, really, really critical and important for our customers, that we want to give them tools to do that. And then the last piece is, okay, now I understand things at depth. How are things working at an aggregate level? What's the performance of the agent? What's the latency? How many times did it escalate to a human? How many times did it resolve the issue? What are my business KPIs? Now, this is not something that we would provide out of the box, but a customer can build those into our dashboards. What are my business KPIs that I care about? So I can look at agent performance, business performance, human performance, all of that together in one place. And so that's kind of the suite of observability and testing things we've been thinking about.
So let me ask. So this is my first reaction is it sounds like Datadog for agents, but it needs to be more than just for the agents, because you're tracing end-to-end system
Exactly right.
performance. But
Exactly.
it also needs to be visible, not just to, again, the technology side of the house, but the business side of the house needs to be able to look at essentially at the reasoning traces and say, it went off the rails here.
Yes. And this is a deep insight. And when we talk about humans and AI together, right? That's a evocative and compelling marketing brand position, right? But in our world, that actually is the actuality of how these agents are being used.
Yeah,
right?
no, the agents have to, all the products have to be designed for humans and agents to collaborate, which means the agents need to be able to, look at human and machine readable or agent readable, like logic and data. And the same way, humans need to be able to look at what the agents are doing.
That's exactly right. And if I think about the future of management, right, as an overarching concept, I mean, organizations exist for this purpose, right, for us to be able to manage through these things. Management itself now requires the ability to understand and process information across both the agents and the humans together, as you think of kind of an end-to-end workflow or a particular outcome that you're trying to drive. And that, I think, is a really important thing when we talk to customers about use cases, right? Hey, what use cases are you trying to go after? You'll typically see them fall into, oh, I've got use cases that are going to be facing my employees, right? I've got assistants, I've got things like that. I've got use cases that are going to follow my customers. So, a sales process, a service process, a marketing process of some kind. Here's the use cases that I have. But what we always talk to customers about is there's a couple of more things that you're going to have to think about. One is this management layer. That's really important. How do you think about the observability, and how do you think about the overall performance of your business? And then another thing that we think is really critical that people are starting to now realize is agents performing scaled process execution. This could be an employee side or a customer side, but really where we think that agents are going to play a huge role is often where the humans are not. How do you do things that are happening in the background to tie your processes together at scale so you can really scale things that you could never scale before? We think that's a really big opportunity area as well. That's going to be really interesting.
Okay, so there's so many different pathways to go here, but I want to clarify one thing on the observability. We agree that you're not just tracing the agent sort of reasoning traces. You're not just keeping track of that. You have to go through this, the whole path through the system.
Yeah, it's both, right? You want to
Yes,
understand the agent really deeply, but yes, it's the whole
but
system as well.
okay, so here's then the question is, we have data cloud, which is which is making this tremendous leap beyond just modeling things like, customer, and sales and snapshots of events, but it's the whole customer engagement journey.
Mhm.
Does And then you've got this end-to-end observability, that all the agent actions and what they're invoking in the system. And my question is all that part of the same platform?
It is. The whole vision is that the strength of Salesforce is our metadata platform, right? And let's clarify the role that Data Cloud plays, a critical role. The critical role that Data Cloud plays is it makes it easier to harmonize data and metadata across a variety of sources. Those sources could be just within Salesforce, could be data you brought into Salesforce, could be connectivity across different Salesforce instances, which is a very, very common thing that we see across our customer base. And of course, it is systems outside of Salesforce, right? So that was really the intent of Data Cloud was, hey, we took this thing that was a CDP product and customers said, oh, actually, guys, that's going to be useful for a bunch of other things as well, like really useful for marketing, but like I kind of need that view when I think about sales and I think about services. That was really the genesis of Data Cloud. And now in this agent world, that is a really, really critical and important need. But you have to add things to it. For example, now, how do we have a semantic understanding of all of these things that we are connecting up, whether it is structured data or unstructured data? But that's really important because as agents reason, they rely on semantic definitions to go figure out, okay, which objects am I using? Which unstructured data do I need to get? Which flow or automation do I need to execute, right? So that semantic understanding is really important. So that's capability that we've added in to Data Cloud as we've kind of created some of the more agent ready types of work. So that is really the role that Data Cloud plays. And so the idea is that all of this is available on a single platform. And I will say, George, and this was a little, prescient by our Steve Fisher, who's our chief product officer, even before all of this agent wave. One of the first things that he did, when he got to Salesforce several years ago was we need to get everything on a single stack. We'd acquired some incredible businesses over the years. I mean, Marketing Cloud itself was an acquisition. We've had some tremendous capabilities we've added to the company. But a thing that the engineering team has been doing over the last few years is get everybody on a single metadata platform, right? And that, as you can imagine, unlocks a tremendous amount of visibility, not just single view of customers, which could be used for all kinds of purposes, but also process and workflow and logic connectivity as you think about customers flowing from a sales process into a service process and so on. So that's been a really significant and important focus for the company. And now, obviously very important and relevant in this agent world.
Okay, but and that was sort of the most articulate sort of definition of the value of the platform I think that I've heard. But I just want to emphasize that this all the data, what we like 10 years ago or 15 years ago called the data exhaust, from systems of like from consumer online services that created the need, initial need for big data, where Hadoop even came out of, well, first Google and then Yahoo. I guess we're creating something new with the exhaust from the agents, and we're adding that to this semantically harmonized platform because it's now you need one platform that tracks the interactions of people and processes, but with agents now as well. So it's all
That is very well said, and you're completely right. Because these agentic conversations, let's make this more concrete. One of the challenges in marketing, as you know, has always been it's a one-way conversation on a bunch of channels. Okay,
yeah.
I mean, it's not even a conversation; it's just a one-way thing, right? It goes in, it's an email, it's a whatever, right? It goes in one direction. But if you can now not just personalize with your available data, however, you can turn those interactions into conversations on these channels, you are now capturing a tremendously valuable amount of data from that agentic interaction that goes into your data set, right? Now, in the past, all of that stuff was kind of lost to the ether. Like you just didn't know where any of it was going to be, right? And so as these interactions with customers as these processes get executed with agents, we now have, to your point, the observability and the ability to now bring in all of that to not just make the agents better, of course, like agent feedback is an important thing to evaluate and improve the agent, but it adds to this corpus of enterprise information that we have now that we can now build much, much richer experiences with. And I think that's a really important thing that I think we've unlocked with this technology.
Okay, so because this is sort of a new learning for me, which is that like it's basically click streams were the source of the big data revolution, and now it's the agent exhaust that's adding to the data platform, and it's not a traditional, analytic data platform. It's a process-centric data platform.
Yeah, I think it's both, right? I mean, I think there is now a incredibly rich amount of analysis that you can unlock here, right? For all the reasons we talked about, right? I have all my observability needs, I have all of these things that I have to go do. But you're totally right. What does that mean for the customer experience, which is effectively a set of processes that are stitched together to execute on workflows and outcomes for customers? That becomes a really rich source of data. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Okay, so let's move to the next section, which is the sort of agent orchestration. Because I mean, everyone's giving a lot of attention because it sounds kind of sexy. We've got 100,000 agents, and they're all talking to each other, and people are talking like a single person, billion-dollar company, and all that sort of happy talk. But let's talk about the challenges first. Like first, um, like if the agents are if they are on different islands,
Mhm.
different application islands, what is the challenge of getting them to communicate coherently? If they're talking to applications that represent different parts of the business and that are talking essentially different languages.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
this is
I'm
gonna
teeing up a bit of a softball, but it's a big, it's the first sort of question that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I think, to the point you made earlier, when you talk to CIOs, you're going to get this question immediately, right? I've got different stacks, I've got different things that interconnect. How do I do that with these agentic systems? And even though, as I said to you, it is a little bit of a day two problem. If you don't have a strategy up front, you're probably going to get hung up. So it's a perfectly fair question. I mean, our point of view on this is we want to give customers choice on the ways in which they want to connect to Salesforce. Now, of course, API connectivity and API governance via MuleSoft is not a new concept for us, right? I mean, MuleSoft is used by a significant portion of enterprises, and we've always had the ability to drive governance, control, performance, all of those things with that. So that's not a new idea. But how does that apply in the agent world? Well, there's a few patterns that we generally see. One pattern is, hey, I need multiple agents just within the Salesforce environments to connect to each other, right? Even just within a single Salesforce environment, I might have agents for my sales application, my service application. If I go to a website, do I really want a different thing talking to me in sales and a different thing talking to me in service? Well, that doesn't sound quite right. And so these things have to coordinate. And so there is this idea of kind of super orchestration agents and conductor agents and all of that stuff, which we will make available for our customers that want that. That's kind of one idea. Then there is, okay, well, what about outside of Salesforce? I have an order management process. I have an ERP system. I've got, some way that I've got my health records sit in some other area. My insurance processes are controlled, in a different system. So how do I connect these agents there? Now here, there are choices for customers to make. Agent APIs exist today. We have our agent API, and so that is one way you can connect these things. The MCP protocols obviously have now unlocked the ability to create a little bit more structure around how these agent interactions happen. We've got an MCP client available for Agentforce. We're building more things on the MCP side to help kind of connect these things. So that's really important as well. And then we talked a little bit briefly about A2A earlier, which is the work that we and Google and others are working, which is, okay, now I want these agents to work in a way that I can pass context. I can think about authorization. I can think about discoverability problems. I can think about those kinds of things. And so there's a lot that we can progress, I think, on the A2A front as the protocols, improve and get better. So the connectivity itself is going to mature to allow customers to do this in various different ways. So that's the technology answer. Then there is the architecture and the outcome answer, which is, okay, I've got this process I got to go define. How do I think about which agents are kind of orchestrating this versus which agents are performing specific roles? And this, I think, is a really important thing that customers are going to have to think about. I mentioned earlier that we are thinking about reasoning differently now, where we can bring together more determinism and more creativity, right? We talked about that a little bit ago. Now, that construct of being able to really write out steps effectively is task level orchestration. That is process level orchestration where I've got a controllable set of things that the agent is going to do step by step. You can take that concept and really extend it to agent interaction as well, right? Simple example is I write out the various steps for an agent to execute. I might, in one of those steps, pull a piece of structured data from CRM. I might call an API in another system. Equally, I might call another agent, passing the same context, passing the right things to ensure that I get this process. And so this notion of orchestration is something that we're leaning heavily into when we think about how our new adaptive reasoning capability is built, is how do we think about agent to agent communication orchestration that's really, really critical in the design of the agent and the workflow. So that, I think, is going to be a huge focus area. And then the third one, as I mentioned earlier with MuleSoft, the governance of this system is really critical. How do I think about what is my topology of agents that have been connected to each other? What is the performance of each of these agents? How am I ensuring security? How am I ensuring my data privacy? How am I ensuring my permission sets are right as these agents interact across systems? How am I governing overall the rules, the performance of these systems? And so that, I think, for CIOs is going to be a really, really important capability, and one that we're bringing to market as well.
Okay, there's just so much to unpack here. Like just in this, at this sort of governance layer, like first when I heard you, actually even before the governance, that sort of architecture and process level, my understanding is that sounds like a cognitive architecture, where it could be cognitive architecture within the scope of a single agent, where there's sort of some amount of determinism, and then there's some part of the process that's generated, by the agent, by its loop. And then same thing, you could have this same cognitive architecture across agents. If I'm trying to recap and make sure I understood correctly.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. Cognitive architecture sounds really fancy to me, so I will let you run with that.
I'm just borrowing from, because that's the Landgraf terminology.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think the simple way to say it is agent reasoning has to have deterministic steps in there so that they can execute on it. That happens at a task level, at a process level. It can also happen at an agent to agent orchestration level.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then the governance level. Let's talk about that, because sounds like it's a new function for the MuleSoft product line. Like it's evolving from sort of managing and governing APIs to managing and governing agents. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. I mean, customers rely on MuleSoft to manage and govern integrations of all kinds, right? And they have for a long time. And we think that we are going to live in a world where there's going to be a lot of agent to agent interaction. There's going to be agent to system interaction. Obviously, we've talked a lot about agent to human interaction, right? And so we think that having the ability for customers to manage that is really, really important, and very aligned with the role that MuleSoft plays in IT organizations and as part of people's architecture. So yeah, we're definitely going to be investing in that. Lots of exciting things, I think, that are happening on that front, and a key part of this stack, right? If you look at everything we talked about so far, there's kind of the agent development stack. There's the agent testing observability stack. There's the agent governance stack as you get to those things. And we think that all of those capabilities will mature and be part of an end-to-end kind of agent management system.
So let me ask then, from the point of view of a customer that they have, let's say, SAP, they have Salesforce,
Yep.
And Databricks and Snowflake.
Yep.
Now, so they've got these islands that have, different semantics and different levels of semantics. How might you help them not just govern sort of an army of agents, but you touched on this with the combination of MCP and A2A and the agent APIs. Help me understand if I have agents working in these islands and I want them to start talking to each other,
Yeah.
but I have to bridge the language in different apps is different, but they need the business context from the different apps and data islands.
Yeah.
How can you maybe start from the point of view of, like, I've got SAP, I've got Salesforce, I've got Databricks and Snowflake?
Yeah. I think there's kind of 3 levels of decisions that you would make in this, George, and I think it does come down to what are the accuracy performance trade-offs you're going to make that have an implication here. So here's what I mean. First of all, you will make decisions at the data layer. Okay. You might say for certain use cases, I need to actually harmonize this data so the data itself is connected for the agents to use across all of these systems. Right? Now, you will, in that scenario, make sure that harmonization is doing this semantic mapping so that you've got an understanding across all these systems of these things. It's kind of the premise of Data Cloud is to go do this. But so you will do that at the data layer, because you might say for certain experiences, just pure agent API interaction or even MCP is insufficient, right? For the performance that we require, or for the kind of accuracy or the depth of context that we actually have to share across these experiences. You need some connectivity at the data layers. That's number one, right? Then you've got kind of the agent layer connectivity, as we talked about, right? It could be using APIs, could be using MCP in certain circumstances. And then as A2A continues to evolve, you've got more context passing, you've got more, you've got more sophisticated things that you can start to do with these A2A systems, right? So that's kind of the agent connectivity layer. And then the third layer is, okay, now I need to govern all this, right? I need to understand what are my rules. I need to understand my permissions, my privacy, my security, my performance, all of those things that are really, really important for me to know how is this kind of system of agents really operating. So I think those are the 3 things that customers will make decisions on. But I just want to emphasize there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of extensibility. That's been kind of the core of what we built at Salesforce for a very long time, right? You can use the platform in a lot of different ways. That does apply here as well. It all comes back to, though, what are you optimizing for that particular use case, right? If it's a use case where, for example, we have a bank that is doing a really complex brief for a client. This is like a lot of deep work, right? I'm looking at multiple systems, I'm tying things together, et cetera, et cetera. That's not a use case that requires, a 2-second response. That's a use case that, you expect the agent to take a little bit of time and go figure that out. So you might have an architectural choice that you make for a use case like that, versus I'm an agent that's facing a customer that is, calling into my contact center because they have an urgent need to reschedule a doctor's appointment. Well, that agent better be quick, right, in its response. Okay. So I think you'll make different choices.
Let me give you one that bridges perhaps these different islands, and that's a long process, like customer onboarding.
Sure.
So it touches the CRM system. Yep. Let's say the bank has got SAP.
Sure.
And it does some of their
data.
Their money laundering kind of analytics in a data lake. So you've got time, but I guess the part that I'm trying to understand is, is there going to be one system that's going to provide governance for the agents for different vendors, and then how do you get the context between the agents, assuming that it's not all at the data layer, as you were saying, you haven't harmonized everything in the data platform,
which you wouldn't, right?
Because you can't do it's like, we're going to have some islands.
Yes.
We're just going to have bigger islands. We're not going to have.
And the agent connectivity helps us in that scenario. Yes.
So help me maybe with that example. And it was good that you're pushing back on what's the business problem. So because what we're hearing from some people is a bank is going to differentiate itself on some can onboard a customer in a couple of hours, and some it takes a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So maybe talk about how you would get everything to work together for something like that.
Yeah. So in that example, the central premise there is that a customer is being brought into your organization. This is a very customer-centric kind of use case, right? So in that scenario, I would be ensuring that I have the minimum amount of latency for the experience to flow together, right? I might make sure that my data layer actually is harmonized to quite an extent so that if I have an agent that's interacting, sitting on top of Salesforce, it's able to write into those systems immediately and able to put the data where it needs to, et cetera, right? So I would probably make some decisions at the data layer that's really important. And in that use case, the orchestration of agents is a customer-centric orchestration, right? Now, there are going to be other examples where you want the orchestration layer to sit in a different system and then it calls Salesforce where needed. But this example that you just gave is a very customer-centric application where the bank is using Salesforce as the place that they're going to be bringing in these customers. And so in that case, Salesforce should be the orchestrator of that experience, even if it is calling agents in other systems and making sure other things are being updated and we're bringing in the right data, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I would design it for that experience. And this is how we talk to customers about it, which is, look, we're going to give you the ability to orchestrate from Salesforce in a bunch of different ways. We're going to give you the ability to build, these orchestration frameworks in a bunch of different ways. And you will think about which use cases and decide where am I putting that control, right? Which system needs to call which one, depending on the centrality of the activation layer. And I think I don't think we talked about this before, so let me say it now. We've talked a lot about data gravity, right? And we make decisions and architecture decisions based on data gravity.
Yeah.
I would posit, George, that activation or action gravity is really important in this agent world. You want to really anchor on where is the action, where is the workflow being executed, and think about your architecture decisions on that basis, because it might appear that you can architect these things in any way you want, but as you know, there's real trade-offs from a performance perspective, an accuracy perspective, an investment perspective, et cetera, that you have to make. And so I think customers really have to think about that, is which thing is where this process is being actually executed, and then let me kind of design from that perspective.
Okay, that is really profound insight, which is because it's almost like we've been taught for 15 years, to think data gravity first. And I've heard this term from Salesforce folks before, but I understand it better now, which is the action gravity, which is the customer processes that you're going to invoke.
Yes.
And the governance around them.
Yes.
And the governance around, that it's integrated with the data related to those, processes that you're going to invoke.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So last question to sum it up. When we talk again in a few months, 3 months, 5 months, whatever, what sort of piece of advice do you want to leave customers on the technology side of the house and the business side of the house with to move forward with?
Yeah, I'll do the business side first. This should be a call to action for CEOs and executive teams to say, have an agent strategy that is tied to the most important things in your business. It sounds easy to say, it's not easy to do in reality. And so that is just really important, I think, from a business perspective, so that you are aligning the business functions, the technology functions, and kind of the corporate imperatives. That is just really important. And that energy, I have seen it, George, where when the executive team is leaning into it, there is a remarkable amount of progress that people are able to make. And whether Salesforce is no different. Mark Benioff has led from the front on Salesforce becoming an agentic enterprise, and I think the same applies there. So that, I think, is on the business side. On the technology side, one of the things I would say is we're now at a point where we are building tremendous technology for low-code development of these agents. We're building pretty comprehensive extensibility for more pro-code, development of these agents. And as you and I have talked about a lot on this call, there really is a merging of the things that traditional kind of business functions would do and traditional technology functions would do. If I was a customer, the thing that I would lean into right now that I think is really important is, how do you bring deterministic control of process into the agent execution is really important. We can have agents that answer questions and we put knowledge grounded, content into when they're doing FAQ. And that's great. That's a really important use case, super valuable use case. But really, the magic is going to be when agents can execute process, and when agents can execute process proactively based on signal, based on personalization data. That is where we're going to unlock a tremendous amount of value. Mark talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you heard, but Salesforce over the last 25 years has probably had tens of millions of customers that we just never followed up on their leads on, like that, just because we didn't have the humans to do it. We didn't qualify it properly. You think of the impact that we could have if we are able to use agents to better qualify customers that are looking for insurance, or customers that are looking for healthcare support that we just are not able to scale today. But to get to that, agents have to be able to execute on process. They have to be able to execute on these workflows. And so the determinism and control over the agent, if I was a customer, that is the thing I would be litigating the most. Is it actually performing to the point and accuracy of where it's consistently driving those results? So if you're going to start an agent project, that's where I would really put your energy.
Okay. That's, and it's old wisdom, which is when we have a new technology paradigm, it's additive.
Yeah.
It's not a replacement.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's put a pin in this, and we'll come back to this and get an update after customers have had a few months to absorb all the richness that's coming out of Dreamforce. So
thank you so much, George. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for taking the time. This was wonderful. All right. So for theCUBE and the road to service as software, this is George Gilbert, and we will be back with another conversation soon. Thanks for joining us.